I was watching Richard Dolan, his YouTube channel. Of course, Richard Dolan is the guy. He's a historian and writer. He has several UFO books out there on the market. Two of them, which I think are two of the best books you can buy. UFOs and the National Security State, volumes 1 and 2. He's the author of those two books, and he has his own podcast and YouTube channel. And I was checking out, he had a series of videos recently with this one guest, this one guy named Allan LaVigne, who used to be a member of the APRO, which is the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization. It's now defunct, but he worked for that group back in the 70s for a little while. And there was a lot of interesting things that this guy talked about. But in one of these videos, and there was a series of videos, and one of them he was talking about this alien encounter that he had back in 1979, in the spring or summer of 1979 in Tucson, Arizona. And, I was just talking about this new documentary that just came out, Missing 411, the UFO connection. From retired, which was made by a retired police officer, David Paulides, and in this case, Allan LaVigne, he talked about something that's very strange that happened, where actually some people disappeared in 1979, and I have to wonder if they were permanently removed from the planet, because I don't know. I don't think he knows. But anyway, he was talking about this story where in 1979 he was living in Tucson, Arizona. In the middle of the night, he heard these cats making noises. There was this old lady it was a trailer park that they lived in Tucson, and he heard one of his neighbors, this older lady, had some cats, and they were fighting in the middle of the night, and he was having trouble falling asleep, and his wife was already sleeping. So he got up and he was going to try to make a noise and scared them away. And he looked out the window and he could see right on the street there was this egg-shaped craft just sitting there. And not only that, but there was this like robotic, strange humanoid robot type being like standing outside. And he went to go to tell his wife about this, and he couldn't wake her up, and he's trying to shake her to get her up, and he wanted someone else to see this, so he would have he could have a witness. And she wouldn't get up. She got to the edge of the bed. She was just sitting there, and she wouldn't get up. And then so he went back to looked out the window. The thing was still there, and now there were not only was this thing still standing there, but there were these other neighbors he had. He said he had there was this hippie couple, this guy and this girl that lived in this other trailer nearby, right next to them, and they're standing outside, in their night clothes, in their pajamas or whatever, and it looked like they're in a trance. Right, and he can't believe what he's seeing. He's still trying to get his wife up. She's not getting up. Right, so then he tries to open the door to go outside, and then something happens, and next thing you know, he wakes up. It's the next day, and he didn't tell his wife about this the next day. He was afraid to tell anybody because he was afraid people would think he was crazy. That he saw. He didn't talk about it till like years later, I guess, And then not long after that, I guess, within a week or so, the landlord in this trailer park showed up and asked him, "Hey, did you see that hippie couple that were living next door?" He hasn't seen them. They owed a rent and everything, and it looks like they skipped town, and so he wanted to go in the trailer, and he wanted this guy Allan LaVigne to join him, so he had a witness when he went in to see what was if they were still there, or if they what they took, and they went in and all the stuff was still there, including looked all their personal items, all their toiletries and things like that. It was like they just disappeared. Now he doesn't know whatever happened to them right after this, but did they disappear? Did the aliens take them, or did they just leave all their belongings and leave? They didn't have a car, so it's a very interesting story, and I'll leave the link for this. You have to, and that's just one of the stories that Allan LaVigne tells on this Richard Dolan show. So you got to check this out. It's very fascinating. But again, yeah, because I was watching that video not right after I watched this new documentary, Missing 411, the UFO connection, and it just reminded me. It sounds like these people might have been abducted permanently, rather. By aliens. So I guess, in addition to, worrying about being abducted by aliens, you could be actually abducted permanently. And I have to wonder, I mean, did that hippie couple that Allan LaVigne see standing outside in a trance, were they taken away forever? And actually, he also talks about, as time went on, he started having flashbacks of this incident, and he started remembering other aspects of it. And he actually remembered seeing a gray alien then, and he was, being taken off the ship, and it was just, you have to see, again, check out Richard Dolan's video on this. I'll leave the link for it. It's an unbelievable story. This Allan LaVigne is extremely interesting, and has a lot. I mean, there's other things that he was talking about too, the amazing stuff. But I'm not going to get into all of it here. I mean, this guy, you could listen to this guy all day long. But anyway, yeah, Richard Dolan has some good stuff on his channel, so I highly recommend checking it out. But it reminds this, thinking about this, I think about these things like I talked about just recently. I talk about the different experiences that I had. Of course, in 1994 on a fishing trip, a nighttime fishing trip, when me and my buddy, we were fishing at this private at this pond in this private community. It was in the middle of nowhere, basically, and this UFO shows up in the middle of the night, like 10 o'clock at night, and this thing as big as a house, no sound, all of a sudden it's just floating there, and I wonder if maybe it's we're lucky the thing didn't take one of us away, and I was sitting it came from behind. I had turned around. I had my tackle box beside me, and at one point, I'll just go through the whole story here a little bit. This incident in 1990, it was August of 1994. My buddy Scott called me up. He said, "Hey, I got permission. You want to go fishing with me at this this place up near Hazel? It was in Pennsylvania. It was a place near Hazleton, Pennsylvania. It's called Beach Mountain Lakes. It's a gated community, and there's a lake there. But he didn't want to fish at the lake. He wanted to fish at this pond. He had gotten permission through some people that knew his mom somehow, and so I said, yeah, why not? So we're gonna go night fishing. So we went night fishing at this thing. He picked me up in his pickup truck, and we drove there, and we weren't catching anything. It was just a boring night. I probably would have totally forgot about it if it wasn't for the UFO that showed up. But at around 10 o'clock at night, this all of a sudden I turn around to get something. I get a cigarette out of my tackle box, and that's when I saw these lights hovering behind a tree. There was 3 giant lights lined up horizontally behind these trees, and then it came out from behind the trees into this little clearing, and then started moving toward us. And I said to my buddy Scott, I said, "What the hell is that?" And then of course the thing came right up to where we were. I mean, this thing was as big as a house. These had these 3 big lights on it. My buddy Scott's right under the edge of it. He's shining a flashlight up at it. And I was scared. I thought the thing was going to land. I was really scared. And because behind us was there was an open field with this tall grass, and then on the perimeter was the forest, and it was hovering over this grassy area, and I thought I was about to land, and I was like, let's get the hell out of here. And as we were throwing the stuff in the truck, the thing started moving away in a different direction over the trees. And I was actually talking to him recently about this, and he was saying how, I was just, again, I bring it up just about every time I talk to him. And he was saying about how there was, it seemed like everything got really quiet when this thing showed up, according to him. He, in his memory of this, it was like there was nothing, no crickets, no sound, no anything. It was complete silence during this whole thing. And when it was moving back over the trees, the trees were bending down, like some force was pushing the tree tops down. So they went, because it was flying unbelievably close to them. But anyway, we were in the truck and we're driving away, and then we're driving down this dirt road, and we had to stop for a minute because there was 20 deer that were crossing the road, running across the road, fleeing away from the direction where that thing just flew. And then we got out of there and everything, and we were both in shock, and it was just an unbelievable sighting. I mean, so close. I mean, I could have threw something. I mean, if I would have picked up a rock, I would have hit it. You know, that's how close it was. It was only 2.5 stories off the ground, and it was right in front of me. I was only like, maybe 20 feet away, standing looking at this thing. It was unbelievable. But now, after watching this 411, the UFO missing 411, the UFO connection, and listen, some of the stuff they were talking about in there, and I'm wondering, if I didn't turn around, is it possible? Like, because this thing, if I didn't turn around and see these lights coming, I wouldn't even known this thing was coming. I mean, you couldn't hear it. I mean, there was no sound. I mean, the lights were above us. I'm not sure if we wouldn't even saw the lights. I don't know. Is it possible that this thing would have kidnapped one of us, abducted us permanently, possibly? I don't know. Is that how it happens? I mean, when you're in the middle of the woods, right? You just, you get plucked out of the sky. You just get plucked out of reality and whisked off forever. It's possible. I don't know. Maybe turning around to get that cigarette, maybe that saved my ass. I don't know. And then I think about the other incident that happened when I was in Hawaii in 2007. I was living on the Big Island in Hawaii when my dog disappeared. That's another thing I talk about. The third incident of the third encounter, where I believe it was an alien encounter. I have no other explanation for it. Where I went out to cut the grass with a weed whacker because you couldn't use a lawnmower where I lived. I mean, basically where I lived I lived in a tropical rainforest, and all the houses there were built on stilts. And I lived basically in the middle of nowhere. There was nobody else that lived around me nearby. It was like, everyone was, pretty far away. And I'm out. It was a nice Saturday, late morning, early afternoon on a Saturday. And I went out to cut the grass. You had to use a weed whacker. And because it was like the house was built on like lava rock, and there would, be weeds growing out of the rocks and everything. And of course, I talked about this before. I had this dog. I only had it for about a month. Her name was Goldie. My one friend there gave me this dog, and she was really wild. And I didn't want to leave her in the house while I was doing this because I was afraid she would be tearing things up while I was in there. So I brought her outside, and I didn't want her to run away because I was going to be weed whacking. So I had this long chain, this long heavy chain, and I clicked it on her collar, the one end, and I got the other end, and I wrapped it around one of the posts that held the house up, and I clicked it in like in a loop, and I clicked it in there. And I'm cutting the grass under the house, right underneath the house, hitting a couple of weeds under there, and she's all wild trying to pull on the chain because she didn't like the sound of the weed whacker. And I was like, "Don't worry," I was like joking around her, "Don't worry about it," and stuff like that. And I look at her, she's there, and then I hit a couple of weeds, and then like 5 seconds later, I turn around, she's just completely gone. Her and that chain are completely gone. I figured she was scared of the sound of the weed whacker and just took off. So I stopped what I was doing. I looked all over for her. I couldn't find her. And, to make a long story short, because I've talked about this a number of times already, it was 2.5 hours later. I couldn't find her. I went to I got scared. I thought maybe she ran all the way out to the highway, somehow, and maybe somebody dropped her off at a kennel. I went there. No, she wasn't there. And I came back. I kept on looking for her for like 45 minutes. Couldn't find her. And all around the perimeter of the house was all this low to the ground jungle, right? It only came up to your knee or your calf, but it was really dense, and you really couldn't move through it. It was too thick, but I looked in these areas over and over again. I couldn't find her, so I gave up and I sat down on the steps. And all of a sudden, she just rises up behind, from the bushes right in front of me. That I had a place that I had looked just a number of times, and and she comes walking out, and the chain was still attached to her. At that moment, I still thought, well, she must have just been scared and I just didn't see her or something. But then I noticed that the other end of the chain was still stuck in that loop. And I couldn't understand how that's not possible. How could the loop go through a solid matter? And I went, looking at the post where I tied her to see maybe there's a space along there somewhere, but there was no space. The post went into the ground. There was just no way. And I looked at other possible areas where I might have tied her up to it, but no. It was impossible. What happened was impossible. And I couldn't figure it out. And then as years went by, I started thinking, well, I saw something on the Skinwalker Ranch on how, there was UFOs, of course, seen at Skinwalker Ranch. And of course, poltergeist activity also, where things would go missing, mysteriously and then show up later on. And I was thinking, well, maybe that's what it was. It might have been possibly aliens took her for some reason. but it was, and that's what I think. That's I pretty much lean to that now. I think that that's what happened. I think something there was there that I didn't see, that was invisible to me, and stole her for 2.5 hours and then returned her for whatever reason, I don't know. But I mean, that's how quick it happened. That dog disappeared out of thin air. I mean, it was so quick. It was so mysterious. But it was returned, unlike these cases with these poor people that completely disappear, that was featured in this documentary that I just watched, this excellent documentary. And there's a lot of cases like this where people just vanish in very mysterious circumstances, and there's no explanation for it. Now, I'm sure sometimes some of these things they probably do have like a more of a prosaic explanation, where maybe an animal kills them and then drags them off. But I think some of these cases, I think sometimes people are taken away forever by aliens. I think it's very possible. I mean, I could see how it could be done. They have the power to do it. My experience in Hawaii showed me with that how easily they could do it. I mean, in broad daylight, a nice, beautiful, sunny day in Hawaii. Nobody else is there. No other houses are around me. And somehow my dog just vanishes and then is returned like 2.5 hours later, like that. Basically right in front of your face, and it's stunning when something like that happens. Like when you have a disappearance of course, luckily it wasn't. Later on, my son joined me over in Hawaii. Luckily, he was never taken or something like that. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. Like, I know there's a lot of cases where, and he was only a little kid at the time. That would have been. I mean, I couldn't even imagine. I mean, and sometimes people's kids are taken away and disappear out of clear blue sky. In fact, there's a case that was mentioned in I think the Missing 411, the movie, the first one, and also in the Missing 411, the UFO connection, where there was this little kid who basically disappeared. A toddler basically just disappeared. He's there, and 10 seconds later, the kid's disappeared, and no trace of him whatsoever. I mean, and this happens a lot. Of course, this FBI agent that was talking during this movie, this John D'Souza, this retired FBI agent, was indicating that in his experience that there's just very mysterious cases, and he actually believes that there is some beings out there that somehow come into our reality and take people away, because it seems like that's the evidence. That's all the evidence the evidence actually shows that. So it's scary, and you got to be careful. And I don't know, how do you stop? I mean, it's going to continue happening. People continue to disappear, and especially it seems in national parks. It happens a lot in national parks. So when you're out in a national park, you got to it's a scary thing. Could be, anybody. Could be an adult, could be a kid, and next thing you know, they're gone forever. And if you turn your head, I mean, who knows? I mean, you just don't know. And I think that's something we got to be aware of. And that's actually, you got to be cautious of, and you got to keep I don't know how you would prevent it. I mean, it's not going to stop. This kind of stuff shouldn't stop people from enjoying nature and going to national parks. But at the same time, you got to make sure you keep your eye on everybody, at every minute, I guess. Especially kids. Because you wouldn't want to have to deal with something like that. That would be horrifying. I mean, and I feel terrible for parents that lose their kids like this. I mean, it's just horrifying. I can't even imagine.